Hello everyone, it's me Daniel. In this video I give you a full guide on how to create a realistic exterior render with Lumion 2023. I will go through all the steps and I explain everything to create these renders. So before we start, there are a few steps that I want to talk about. The first step is the model. Is there a model or do we need to create one? I got this model from the 3D warehouse and changed some things. The original model is from Lewis. The link will be in the description to his model. The second step is what scene do I want to create or does the client want? So for this one, I want to render between the seasons spring and summer. And the last step is 3, the camera angles. So before we make a render, let's first put down some points where I or the client wants to have the renders. So for example, in this scene we have a house and a road. So the obvious points for creating a render will be in the front and maybe one slightly to the corner. Those are the ones that I want to create. So that means that we don't have to put all the detail in the backyard because there won't be any renders to see all those details. Most clients like to have multiple renders of their project. And thanks to Lumion, it's really easy to create multiple renders from different angles. So now let's get our model and make sure everything is textured before we import it into Lumion. Otherwise we could have objects with the default material that are not supposed to have the same material. So without the whole part of the modeling, we're going straight into Lumion. Let's talk about the steps that we are going to do in this guide. So to start, we go to Create New into Lumion and let's create a plain environment. After the project is created, make sure to select the imported models and let's go with Place. Then there will be a UI about the imported models and let's import a new model. We can import the model as a SketchUp file because we don't need to export the file as a Collada file anymore. We can just straight up import it as a SketchUp file. So let's do that. You can change the name. We can have here a new folder or a folder that's already existing. I put it in my projects folder. And we don't need to import the edges and we also don't need to force double-sided faces. So let's press OK and let's import the model. Now let's place our model into the world. I mostly always set it on the 0 and I put everything on 0. And then because the axis of the project is a little bit higher in the world map, we're going to extend it so everything will be visible. For the next step, it will be the camera positions. I like to place the camera positions on the angles where the client or I want to create the renders, of course. This is essential because when we put together our scene, we can always go back to the cameras and see how the scene is going to look. And we can see if it looks good or are even objects in frame or not. Let's go to the right down corner and let's press the photo option. Let's press the right mouse button on the camera, on the frame. Let's create one camera over here. Make sure to press the eye at level because this is what we want to have. I like to put the focal length to 25 and because the frame is a little bit low, I put it over here and make sure to put it in the middle, for example over here. Then I go here and store the camera. Let's go to the next one. We have the same frame, right mouse button, and I go to the left and create one over here as well. For the cameras to see if it's correctly, I also go to the add effect and I'm only going to add the 2-point perspective because as you can see now there is a slightly edge over here, so now I know that I can move the camera over here a little bit and maybe even a little bit more, so for example over here, and replace the camera. Let's look at this one as well. Let's add the 2-point perspective and this one looks perfect. So that's for the cameras. Now we can always go back to the renders and see the changes that we made and if it looks good. The next step are materials. Materials are crucial and really important, and I also talked a lot about them in my videos, and I made multiple videos about them, how to get them and how to import them into Lumion. For this step, I want to add some stucco, wood and metal to the building. I use the highest quality I can find in the Lumion library for each and every one of them. If there are no materials in the Lumion library that fits the scene or is qualified or the client doesn't want them, you can always go to the internet and try to find one there. For example, let's go to polygon.com. Let's go to the website. And let's select the free tag over here on the top. Let's scroll down until we find this random match white oak wood veneer texture. Now we can sign up or log in to get this material for free. After we have logged in, we go back to the free and select the texture again. For the texture, for the resolution, we can go with 4 or 8K. I would like to have the 4K. The workflow will become the metalness, and the selected maps, we can here select the maps that we need. We don't need the ambience occlusion, we don't need the displacement 18 bits. We only need these 5 maps. So we need the color, the normal, the metal, roughness and displacement. If we have selected those, we can press download. Let's put the zip file on a place where we can find it easily. So for my will be the desktop. So back in Lumion, we select the material that we want to import. So for example, I want this wood to have the downloaded wood we just got from Polygon. In that case, I want to have new. Now we want the standard. Let's go to the settings, and now we can import our maps. So for the first one, I want to have the diffuse or the color. So now let's go to our desktop. You can unzip the file that we just downloaded, otherwise it won't work. So it's just press and then unzip. And now we're going to select the color map. So let's open this one, and we're going to do this for all. We're going to import it like this for every and each one of them. The next one will be the relief, so that's going to be the normal map. We're going to need the roughness map. The roughness map over here. We got the metalness map. Metalness can also use to be the reflection map, and then we need the displacement. After that, we have imported all the elements. Then I would like to have the roughness and relief and the reflectivity all to 100%, and then we can have some little bit of displacement. I set it to 50, and now we have imported our wood texture. But as you can see, the texture isn't really aligned, so for that we can go to the tab UV coordinates, and as you can see, it's not available. And the reason why it's not available is because we have set the map scale to imported, so the map scale will stay the same. But luckily, Polygon has set in the website that the file is 2.5 meters or 8 feet and 2 inches. So if we go back into Lumion, we can just add here 1.5 meters. And then the scale will be the same. And now as you can see, the UV coordinates are now not grayed out, and we can change the settings over here. It's correctly, yes. That's for the wood. Let's save the changes, and now we have our wood imported into our project. Here is a little tip about the material and the maps if there are textures that don't have a roughness map. If you find online a material without a roughness map but only with a specular map, you can still import it into the map roughness, but if you press on the menu, you can inverse the map. So when you inverse the map, it will actually act like a roughness map instead of a specular map, because roughness and specular are the opposites of each other. Now for the rest of the materials, I want to add some stucco to the walls and change the color a little bit. Let's do that also for the stucco on top, but change that color to a dark blue. Let's add some default glass to the windows. Let's also add a metal material for the window frames. I take a dark metal for the window frames, and I take a lighter one for underneath. Let's add some grass. Let's go to the landscape and go with some 3D grass. I want to have some clean cut grass, but you can always change the settings with all these sliders. For example, the size, the length, how much it has been cut, and the curliness. Also, you can have the map scale to have a little bit more variation of height in the grass. For the curbs, I take a concrete material from the library in Lumion with a tiling. I use this one. Then I go to the settings, and I'm going to transform the orientation of the UV maps, like so. And the reason I do this is for exactly as you can see, is that now it looks like every curb has a separate stone, just like in real life. Now I can change the orientation a little bit more, so it aligns better with the rest of the street. And let's select the normal concrete polished for the driveway. Let's add some tiles for the walkway. Let's add some wood over here. Like this. Now you can add all the materials that you want from the Lumion library to your project. Make sure you use the high quality ones with at least 2K or more in resolution. The high quality materials can be found in the library if you hover over a material, and there will be a third party logo on top of them. Also, if you go on top of them, in the name there will be the size of the resolution. For example, for these wooden planks, this is a 3K texture. Also, I'm not going to bother you all with the whole texturing of the model, so here is the end result with all the materials in place. Now we can increase the quality of the materials even more by adding some softness to the corners. This adds more realism to the materials, because in the world there are no objects with a perfect 90-degree angle. If you select the material, for example here, concrete, we can go in the settings menu and go all the way to the gear and the settings. At the top there will be the option soften edges. If we zoom in, we can increase the slider and you will see that there is a small change happening at the corner. It's going to bend some light so it looks like the model has softened corners. This is a perfect tool, of course, because you don't have to model all the soft edges in your model as well. You can just use the slider on the material and Lumion will do the work for you. Let's do this also for the walls, the window frames, and the wood. Lumion also has an extra option to add more details to the materials called weathering. You can find this option if you select the material, go to the settings, go to show more, and then the third one will be the weathering option. Here we have weathering strength, and the weathering type. Tip: don't overuse this effect. It adds imperfections to the materials and it makes it look more damaged, and it can make it look too much damaged if you put the weathering strength to the max. So just add a little bit to increase the detail of certain materials. To not overuse it, I will suggest to put the strength not higher than 30, depending on your project or the weathering effects that you need to create. We can also use a weathering type. Depending on the material that you are using, you can select stone, wood, leather, silver, aluminium, gold, iron, copper, and plastic. For the concrete, I would suggest to keep it at stone. You will see that there is a difference between the stone weathering type and, for example, the wood weathering type. For all the stone types like plaster or concrete, I chose the stone option because that one is the closest that you can get depending on the materials that you can choose. Now let's add a little weathering to some materials. For example, the stucco, the wood. Make sure to select the wood type and all the road materials. So that's it for the materials. Now we know how to import custom materials, change the UVs and the texture maps, and also how to change the softness and the weathering effect. In the future there will be a video about how to create realistic materials with all the options and settings there are and that Lumion has to offer. But not in this video, because otherwise it will take too long. So for the next step it will be the foliage. For the foliage I always have two rules that I use for every render. The first one is depending on where the project is located. I usually make a palette of the foliage that I'm going to use in the render. That way I don't have to go back to the library and I can just copy and paste the elements of the foliage from the palette that I created. For this render I'll take broad trees and plants that you will see in a forest or in a grassland. The second rule is the placement of the foliage. I make sure to put the big trees in the back, I put the smaller trees in the middle, and I put the bushes and plants in the front. That way I have layers of green that complements the building and don't cover up the building. Also for the placement, make sure to look at the different cameras and the angles that you have so you can see if there are plants or trees don't cover up the building too much. The last thing I want to talk about is the difference between the fine detail and the normal foliage. Only use the fine detail foliage close to the camera because this gives the most detail and it looks also the most realistic in your render. Don't put big fine detail trees all the way back into the render because it will lose its detail and it also makes your project really heavy. Those are the rules that I use to make good looking and realistic renders. Also don't forget, have a little bit of fun, experiment with some different types of foliage and also make sure it looks correct and it complements the building. For the next step, let's add some scene objects. It could be exterior objects like lampposts or cars, but it can also be interior objects like curtains or extra furniture. There is already some furniture in this model, but we can also add some more details. Now go back into Lumion and let's add some interior elements. For example, like books, maybe some furniture over here in this bathroom, maybe a picture on the wall. And let's do that over here as well. That's for the interior. Don't add too much interior elements because we are focusing now on the exterior render and not the interior. Now let's add a car. And some lampposts. I don't want to add too much detail because too much elements can make the render complex and in that case it will make the render look unrealistic. The next step is to add some people or animals to your liking. This adds more detail and it makes the render come to life. I personally don't like a cluster of birds, so I normally add 1 or 2 birds just to my renders. So for the people and animals, we go to the option People and Animals in the content library. We want to place people and then we can select between a lot of different options we have. I would suggest to go to the People 3D static because these have the highest quality. Let's go with this one. Let's put them over here in the bedroom, facing this way. Now let's go to the render and see how it looks. Perfect. Now for the animals. I usually add some birds to my scene to fill up the sky. I go to place and I go to birds. I normally take the pigeon, place it on top of the roof, and then I manually put it higher or lower, and I can rotate the pigeon as well to make sure it fits in the scene. Let's go to the photo to see where the pigeon is located. As you can see, the pigeon is in the right top corner and it fills a little bit, but I would prefer to have it over here in the left corner. So we can rotate the pigeon a little bit more and there he is in the left upper corner. Perfect. That's it for the people and animals. It's not that complicated and you can just look in the content library what you prefer. If you want to have static people or if you are creating an animation, you would of course animated people. The static people, 3D people are the highest quality. You could also, of course, in post-production add the people later on. For the next step, I like to add some decals. Decals are essential because decals add imperfections to your render. And those imperfections really boost the realism of your render. So for example, let's add a decal to the concrete slabs. We can do that by going to the Effects tab inside the content creator and let's go to Place and then let's go to Decals. Here Lumion provides us with some decals that we can use. I'm going to the third tab and I'm going to the plaster one. I'll go with plaster, first one of the plaster family. Let's select it and we can change the color because now it's a little bit too prominent. I like to add a little bit of a gray color to it. Now I like to make it a little bit more transparent. so it's more subtle. An opaque decal is more prominent into the render. It draws more attention to it, while a more transparent decal actually adds subtle details to the render. It's up to you what you do. You can make more prominent decals with more effects like exposed bricks, or you can add subtle details, like for example we are doing to the concrete. I like to make the decal a little bit bigger, like so. We can also add a little bit more of rotation, so we can change the heading, for example like this. And now we have added a subtle detail to the concrete. Let's also do this for the stucco on some places on the wall. Let's go over to the wall. Let's again go to place, and let's go with a different type of plaster. For example this one. Let's add it over here, and let's make some changes again. For the color I keep it white, and for the transparency I make it more transparent. And now for the scale, you can scale it up. And now we have added a little bit more of variation. It's really subtle. It's really subtle for the walls. We can make it even a little bit more transparent, so it's not so prominent. And now we have added a little bit more of detail to the walls. And you can of course do this everywhere. We could also do this on the entire roof, and we can also do it over here at the balcony, but that's up to you. You can as much decals as you like. They are not very heavy for the project, and they will add a lot more to the project itself and the render and the outcome eventually. But be careful, don't overuse it, and make sure it adds more realism and it has a value. Otherwise it's just you're putting too much time in them, and they can take a lot of time to get a lot of decals into your project. So choose wisely. I have added some more decals to the stucco, to the concrete, and also around some windows. And finally we are here on one of our last steps that we are going to talk about, and that's going to be the render settings. So let's go back into Lumion, and now let's go back to the photo option, and let's go to our first render. From here we are going to add some effects. You could of course, if you are not very good at the render settings, you can just go to the custom styles. Of course select one of the pre-made from Lumion, for example the realistic one. I mean, it looks good, but it can be so much better. So let's go back. So let's go to the custom styles, and let's add them manually. I first want to create the one without ray tracing. So for the effects that we are going to need, is the first one will be the real skies. I want to select the day scene where the sun is not too high. Let's rotate a little bit until we have the sun hitting the building, but not too much. We're not going to change this yet. We first want to add our effects. Let's add also the shadow. Let's also add the skylight. Let's add the reflection. Let's add the hyperlight. And let's also add the color correction. These are the main points for creating a render and setting up the weather and the feeling of the render itself. Let's first go to the skylight. The brightness is 1 and the saturation is 1. The brightness will increase, of course, the brightness of the sky. I like to set this to 2 and this to 1.1 and this to 1.2. And we also want to turn these two on. We set the skylight render quality to ultra for the best results. Then we go to shadows. The shadow range isn't really important. We just want to look at the coloring and the brightness. The brightness is now fully extended, and that's something we don't want because that makes the scene too bright. Let's put it about at 50. The coloring of the shadow will actually make the shadows look more blue. So if we increase the coloring, you get really blue shadows, and if you remove the coloring, you will see that the shadows are now more natural. We want to have about between 20 to 30 coloring. The interior and the exterior option. The interior is going to add more shadow and is actually going to make the scene a little bit more darker. And if you go to exterior, as you can see, it makes it more lighter. If you make a picture from the outside, from an exterior, the interior will almost always be pitch black. So we will put it on interior and make the shadows darker. Same goes for the brightness. Let's put it a little bit lower, so the interior is much darker. Also, put the soft shadows on, but also the fine detail shadows, because the fine detail shadows will actually create more complex shadows inside the fine detail plants and also in the grass. For now, we keep the shadows like this. Let's go to the reflection. The reflection is really important. I would like to have the speed ray on, and I also want to see the preview because I want to see the reflections. So for the reflections, we work with planes, and as it says, you have to put some planes down to elevate the reflections of, for example, glass. How more you use, the more complex the project will become and the more heavy the project become. So make sure not to overuse this. For example, in this render we only see this glass, and as you can see, it's actually putting all these on as well. We need this glass behind the wood. This we can also change the plane margins, so if you increase it, you will see that it's going to select even more and more. And now it has selected all the glass on this side. Now let's also do this for the door, and now let's also do this for this little window over here. Select OK, and now you'll probably be thinking there is not a lot of detail in the glass yet, and that's true because we haven't put anything in front of the building. So that means that the reflection it's going to show us is actually going to show us this plain field. We're going to fix this in the next step. Then for the hyperlight. Hyperlight is going to elevate the amount of light there is in the render. So the default value will always be 25%, and I will keep it on 25% because that's almost the amount that you probably be needing. Then we can go to color correction. And this is where it gets interesting. It's like the post-production that you can do inside Lumion already. So for example, we can increase the temperature and we can change the tint. I don't like to change the tint. We can change the exposure, but on this little button it says auto exposure. So that means that Lumion is going to auto expose our render. We can close it and then we can manually add exposure to it, and I prefer it that way because now I have more control on how much light actually I want to have in my render. Let's select preview to see how it looks. If I look right now over here, I have the feeling that this wall is really white, so that means that the highlights of this render needs to be a little bit less. So what we can do is we can increase the contrast to give it more contrast, so it actually becomes lighter and the shadows become darker, but I can reduce the highlights. We can increase the shadows a little bit, and I like to have some color, but to add a little bit more realism, I always put the saturation a little bit lower, about 50%, because now the colors are not that bright. There still are, but the scene looks now a little bit more. Also, with the new Lumion option, you can have LUTs. Lumion has some default ones that you can select, and these are actually just filters that you can put on top of your render. I normally don't use them, so I will just keep it on default. Now we can add some more effects if we want to. For example, we can go to the enhancements, and I would like to have some bloom and sharpness. These are going to help to add a little bit more flair to the render. For example, for sharpening, I want really low, 0.0 or 0.1 and not higher. And for the blue effect, I also want to lower it, but just adding a little bit of bloom to enhance the sun that's hitting the camera. So from here we could export the render and then see how it looks and make some little changes. I'm not going to talk about post-production in this video because I want to keep this as a Lumion guide and not an entire workflow guide. For that, you can watch my other videos on time lapses or other videos where I have worked on with post-production, and there will be coming a video about post-production and how I use it for my renders. This is the render that we just created. There are a few things that I don't like about this render right now. Making renders is actually a process. I want to give this a little bit more insight because you have to render your project, look if it looks great, and then you can go back and change some things, just what I talked about. So let's do this right now. Let's try to fix the problems that we like. This is also the last step I want to talk about. those are the adjustments. The adjustments are always there and they will always be there in the workflow, because you have to make some little changes eventually after you have set up the entire project. So let's do that right now, and let's start with filling up the horizon in the reflections. So back into Lumion, we go to the build options in the right lower corner, and we are going to put some trees and bushes in front of on the other side of the road. So let's, for example, put the line option over here, and let's put the tree in here. Let's put another tree in here as well. Let's maybe put the amount of entities lower. As you can see, you can still see through. So that means that will be needing some plants. And let's go with this one. Let's add this one as well. Let's do it. And now we can manually, of course, change some placements of these bushes. So let's put the bushes there a bit to the front. And let's see how that now looks inside our render. As you can see, it has some reflections right now over here in the windows here and here. Let's move this person down into the dining area. And also let's make him not too prominent over here. And let's put him behind the table over here. Also, let's go to the top. Let's select the birds and let's remove them. And this looks better in my opinion. I also don't like the car. So for the car, I'm going to select the car and I'm going to rotate it. First, I removed the metallic paint a little bit. It was 50 and now it's going to be 15. And let's rotate the car facing the road. Let's also change the color of the car to a gray or a white color. Those are the changes that I wanted to make. Let's go back into the photo option. Let's go over here, put the intensity even a little bit lower. Let's have the bloom effect maybe a little bit higher. The brightness will be a little bit lower, just 1, but we are going to keep the saturation. And let's go over here and let's add the autumn colors. I want to have this onto all the layers, and we're going to press the green one, but for the saturation, because this is really green, we want to lower the saturation. And if we change this, as you can see, it adds a little bit of variation to all the plants. Let's also rotate the skylight a little bit. The sun intensity will maybe be a little bit lower. I think we are going to keep the render like this. And now let's just go and export this picture. So after all the adjustments that we made and we are finally happy with how the render looks, we can copy the effects, styles and paste it in all the other camera angles that we have created, because we just have to use one, then we can just copy and paste them for the other cameras. Over here we select the photo 1, go over here to the menu and we can say copy effect list. After that we go to the other preview to the other render that we have over here, and then we can here press say paste effect list. Now the exactly list of the effects is now applied to this one, and now you can see that the effects is almost the same, and we can press the render button to see how this one looks as well. So after we have exported everything to the fully, we can finally see how it looks, and as you can see, here is the final result. So that's it for this Lumion exterior guides that I wanted to make. Hopefully you guys learned something new and it was helpful for some of you guys. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment and consider subscribing. It's a new type of video that I create with my face, of course, as well, and a lot of explanation. For now, I hopefully see you guys in the next video. Bye!